everybody. I am your host, Brendan. Welcome to Rounding Third. What is Rounding Third? You already know. You subscribe, you like. Click the subscribe button. Click the like button. This is where me and my brother Todd get to listen to stories of our father. We get to share them with you, and we're very happy to have another episode. Dad, how you doing? How you been? How's life?
Everything's wonderful. Everything's doing well.
That is correct, and we're in sunny Arizona, so we're winning. You are losing. And Todd, speaking of losers, how is it in New York?
I've been in New York for all about 4 hours. I just flew in from Tampa. You can tell I am tan.
No, you're not.
Spent 2 days out in the sun. Listen, for me as a French Canadian and Polak, this is as tan as I get.
That's very good. So why did you come back to New York if you were in Tampa?
Because I have to work.
No jobs.
I'm told by doing this I get paid $7.20p.
Yes, it comes in your account every minute.
That's right.
It's fantastic. Well, here we are. Welcome to another episode of Rounding Third. Dad, if you're ready to take it away, I am also doing fantastic. I'm super excited about this episode. Looking forward to it.
Okay, folks, welcome to Rounding Third. Today, I want to tell you a story about a guy named Joe. That settles down to about 10 million people it could be. I tell these stories because I want them told to somebody else. Stories are how events and people get remembered. So today I want to share the story of Joe. Now, it's an old story because Joe was born in 1886 in a small town called Seguin, Texas. And Joe grew up. He grew up. He was huge. In high school, he was well over 6 feet tall. He settled in at about 6'6". Now, back in the early 1900s, that was a huge man. Joe loved playing baseball. And as you can imagine, Joe could throw the ball very, very fast. In fact, it has been said that few catchers could catch a whole game with Joe. They'd have to come out by the 5th or 6th inning because their hand was sore from catching his pitches, and another guy had to come in. Joe developed a drop ball, which is what they call, I think we would call that today a slider, because the pitch comes in looking just like the fastball and then just, boom, falls off the table. Well, between those two pitches, Joe didn't have to do much else. He excelled, and when he was 23 years old, the pros came knocking, and he signed a pro contract, and he went into professional baseball. This guy from a small town in Texas became one of the best pitchers in baseball in the 1900s, in the early 1900s. Switched teams, ended up in the city of Pittsburgh, where his team was immensely popular, and he was the most popular player on his team. And he was an amazing pitcher. I'll tell you his name now. His name was Joe Williams. Okay, that knocks it down to 5 million people. But Joe was a pitcher in the early 1900s, settling in Pittsburgh, where he was just famous. He was such a good pitcher, he developed the nickname Cyclone because he was so hard to hit. Many of the box scores have entered the name Cyclone instead of his real name. In time, he got his nickname. He became known as Smokey Joe Williams. So the question is, if he's so famous, well, let me just give you an example. In his career, he pitched and beat Grover Cleveland Alexander, Walter Johnson, Chief Bender, who's maybe not so well known, Waite Hoyt, who's in the Hall of Fame. He beat all those guys. His team played the world champion New York Giants with him pitching. This was in 1917. He pitched against them 3 times. He won 2 out of 3. The one game he lost was 1-0, despite the fact that Cyclone threw a no-hitter. The Giants got no hits but scored a run, and he lost 1-0. This guy was dominating. In later on in his life, he pitched in a game that drew a lot of fans because there was now a younger pitcher that everyone thought was better than him. So he pitched against Satchel Paige. Oh, I got the idea. Smokey Joe Williams never pitched in Major League Baseball. He had to play in the black leagues. In his game against Satchel Paige, he beat him 1-0, and he was in his 40s. Smokey Joe Williams didn't play for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He played for a team called the Homestead Grays, probably the most incredible team of its time because they were so good they didn't play in the black leagues. They were independents. They would play anybody, anywhere. The historians went through and looked up the Homestead Grays, I think it was around 1931, okay? And they found out everything they could find out about the team. Listen to this record. They won 143 games and lost 29. They had Smokey Joe Williams, they had Josh Gibson, and they had other great players you probably never heard of. Oscar Charleston, Willie Foster, Judd Wilson. They were the force of baseball. Occasionally, they did get games against major league teams, and I told you who he beat. I mean, he beat anyone that came against him. Now, Ty Cobb, we wouldn't call Ty Cobb an integrationalist. I'm being nice. This is what he said about Smokey Joe Williams. He said that Smokey Joe Williams, had he been able to pitch in the major leagues, would have won over 30 games every single year. He was that good. And he was as good or better than Christy Mathewson, who was recognized as the best pitcher of the time. As I said, in his early 40s, he was still pitching, and he beat Satchel Paige. There's argument. In the end, who was better? Because Satchel got more well-known because he pitched till he was 50. This is a guy who played against both. His name was Sam Streeter. If I was going to pick a man to throw hard, I'd have to pick Joe Williams. I pick him over all of them. They talk about Satchel and then throwing hard, but I think Joe threw harder. Used to take 2 catchers to hold him because their hands would be swollen by the 5th inning. And that is how great Smokey Joe Williams. Listen to this one. August 2nd, 1930, at the age of 44, Smokey Joe Williams strikes out 27 Kansas City Monarchs, winning a 1-0 game in 12 innings. 27 strikeouts at the age of 44. Now that was kind of poo-pooed because it went into the nighttime and the lights were horrible. And actually the batters had a hard time seeing the ball. So we have to discount that one a little bit. He was 20-7 when he pitched against major league teams in exhibitions. 20-7. Cyclone Joe Williams, retired from baseball at the age of 44. He married a woman named Beatrice. She stayed with him all his life. So Joe, to take care of himself after he retired, became a bartender in Pittsburgh. And he was a great bartender. People loved to come in and talk to Joe. He would talk baseball. He was such a popular guy that eventually, at the age of 64, he died. And he was just, the people of Pittsburgh loved Smokey Joe Williams. Fortunately, before he died, baseball got around to giving him some credit. The Polo Grounds had a Smokey Joe Williams Day in 1950, 1 year before Joe actually died. So there's a lot of debate. When a guy can't pitch in the major leagues, how good was he really? Bill James, Mr. Stathead himself, the guy who people use for Moneyball, he ranked the best players of all time. And in terms of pitching, well, just players, Bill James ranked Smokey Joe as the 52nd greatest player in baseball history, behind Sandy Koufax, but ahead of Roy Campanella and Bob Feller. I mean, he was really an amazing pitcher, even to be mentioned as competitive or better than Satchel Paige, but unknown. So now we get to the point. Why couldn't Joe play in the major leagues? Joe's mother was a Native American. She was Native American Indian, but she fell in love with an African American man. So Joe's DNA was half African American. And because of that minor factor, he was never allowed to play the skill that God gave him and get known as a Hall of Famer with all those other Hall of Famers of those times. I mean, he would have been pitching against Babe Ruth, right? He would have been able to compete against those people, but he couldn't. It was really one of the dark times of American history was integration. And I deliberately talk about heroes of black baseball. I think this is the 5th one I've covered. I will do more because I think they should always be remembered. So today, hats off. Smokey Joe Williams, just Cyclone Smokey Joe Williams. You were an amazing pitcher.
First time I'm hearing about him, which probably would surprise very few people, but I don't know. Every time you get into the stuff that when you talk about with the Negro Leagues and that type of thing and the records that they had and how good they were, I find myself getting, I don't know if it's justifiably angry about the fact that we never got to see them perform or we never heard about them performing with the major leagues proper, right? And I think the worst part about that is you don't get the stats as accurate as you would have gotten them if they were with the major leagues, right? And we've talked about, the power of Gibson. We've got, the speed of some of these guys, and to have this pitcher out there who, how tall would you say he is? 6'7"?
I think they said 6'5" or 6'6", but he's a big guy.
He's a cheat code. He's like that guy, that kid from the Spurs who just sits under the basket, and then you can also drain threes, right? Unusually physically dominating, but then also able to throw absolute smoke. So,
yeah. So, the credit to him and to the people who are related to him as an ancestor, but also to all those guys that played back then, and we just need to tell their stories as much as we can. There is a Hall of Fame for the Negro Leagues. I think it's in Kansas City, and where you get to meet all those guys. Now, I didn't tell you this, but Smokey Joe did get put in the Hall of Fame, in the regular Hall of Fame. He was put in the Hall of Fame in the early...
Was he still alive?
No, I don't have it, but I know he was put in the Hall of Fames. Most of the Negro League players got put in the Hall of Fames, got put in the 2000s before they started putting them in. But
that's tragic.
I think we've talked about this in the past with the with these players and having. I know we have Jackie Robinson Day in Major League Baseball, but to have a Smokey Joe Day, for instance, obviously, I think it would be great for players to remember folks in the league that they were, that they played in, that they could, honor them by wearing their jersey or wearing their name or what have you. But this sounds to me a lot of memories of Randy Johnson when you talked about his pitch, his height, his strength, the speed of his fastball. Randy Johnson back in the day obviously would hurt anybody's hands. I think people also forget that back then they didn't really have good gloves. There was no mitt that would cushion the ball. So a lot of these guys were playing where they would be able to catch with their bare hands. So it makes sense that people could not last a whole game, especially a pitcher that pitched that fast. But furthermore, I would imagine that there were a lot of people that didn't want him to pitch because it would be miserable to catch. I mean, if you're talking about a ball that drops like it does, that's going into your shins, going into your feet. We have.
Did they say how fast he was pitching?
They didn't have any way of measuring it that I'm aware of. I did find out they put him in the Hall of Fame in 1999, 47 years after he died. So, but he did get put in.
Because wasn't the average pitch in that era, wasn't it between 85 and 90?
I think so.
Like that was the top level, something like that?
Yeah, that's probably true. So who knows?
He could have been in the low 90s.
Yeah.
Would be a significant difference. But I know we didn't have integration now. That took a while, obviously. But when you look at how the black community created their own league, they supported their own league, and then they had some of the best players in baseball playing against each other. I mean, this team sounds like a juggernaut, and it would be a treat to watch them play any MLB team. From the batters to the pitchers, and for a person like Ty Cobb to say that, I mean, you're not talking about somebody who was trying to anoint anyone or try to bring
not a notable race relations prince,
correct,
as they would say.
So you're living in a society today where everyone runs to the microphone to try to show how much they want everyone together, so they can get accolades. Ty Cobb wasn't doing that. He was simply just stating a mere fact that if this guy was playing with the major leagues, he would be amazing. But that would be the case with the majority of these folks. So, yes, it's tragic, but at the same time, we were still treated to that because they didn't sit on the sidelines and say, well, we're not going to create it. They created their own environment, their own universe, and it's recognized today as well it should be. So I think it would be wonderful if Major League Baseball, and I know we're just a small little BadderSports Network on Swing Batter, but it would be great if they had a month, not just a day for Jackie Robinson Day, but a month that players could recognize these great players, wear their jersey, remember who they were, remember what they did, because at the end of the day, they traveled, they played in worse fields, but at their passion and their abilities are second to none. It's why they're in the Hall of Fame. It's why we have a Negro League Hall of Fames, which, again, all of those things to me should be embraced now today by MLB. There's no reason they can't have a month like that. You can sell the jerseys. You can wear the old teams. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can kind of read about and buy. And I've, ever since you've been telling these stories, Dad, as you get further into what baseball was like. Yes, you had two separate leagues, but you still were not cheated of their talents. It would be another thing if they weren't allowed to play baseball at all. We still have these stories. Yes, we don't have all the stats, but I mean, you had a Randy Johnson before Randy Johnson, basically. That's the way that I look at it. Everything you described to him. Now, I would imagine he was probably a bigger man. He wasn't as thin as Randy Johnson, and Randy Johnson was 6'10". But the pitches you're talking about and the speed and then the slider,
you can only evaluate a person's talent against the people of his era.
Correct.
It's true. Right. Maybe he didn't throw 100 miles an hour, but if no one else was doing that and he's excelled for his era, he was the best there was. Okay, so
27 strikeouts in one game. I don't care who you are. Yeah. That's just tough.
Yeah, he was a force. When you're so good, they don't even have to say your name. They just say Cyclone, and you go, uh-oh.
Right.
I mean, but that's the other thing. I think about with Randy Johnson, when people went up against him, there were people already defeated before they even played. I can imagine you looked at the box score and you're like, golly, well, we're going to lose. I mean, take 3 pitches or swing away, do the best you can. Good luck. Hopefully he's not feeling good. Hopefully he ate some bad food. Hopefully he's not pitching so great. So again, to your point, Dad, the more we bring attention to these heroes of an era, the better I think we are as a society as a whole. Because, again, the more you embrace people's talents, especially when you're talking about sports, and I think sports does a really wonderful job. We don't care what you are. We don't care where you're from. If you have a talent, we want to see it. And the world of sports is so, full of its own mess behind the scenes, whether it's agents, whether it's money now, whether it's, scouts and talent. There's a million things happening behind the scenes, but to be able to take the time after an athlete does great things to reflect on that and to be able to do that in such a way, I think it's really awesome. I think it's great to hear these stories.
It's hard.
We had the controversy with these team names, right? Because these names are racist or they're historically insulting or something like that. Why are we not taking the names of some of these Negro League teams and giving them new life with some of these teams?
Yeah. It's
it's...
Well, maybe they feel like we want to keep them. There's only one Kansas City Monarchs, and they should be remembered as they were. I was just thinking about this in the 20s, different eras, we can't really picture what it was like. In the 20s, we're talking about before the Depression or the Roaring 20s, people had money. Pittsburgh Pirates were actually very good in the 20s. I think they went to 2 or 3 World Series. And you had the Homestead Grays, who were just outside of Pittsburgh. And that was the sport of the country. I mean, there was no NBA or NFL, certainly no hockey in Pittsburgh, and it was a sport. So in the summertime in Pittsburgh, you had 2 really good teams playing that you could go watch. So it's interesting. The sad part is that to go see a Pirates game as a black person was difficult.
Right.
Okay. As a white person, to go watch the Grays, you could just go. So the door did not swing both ways in terms of attendance, although I'm just guessing that if you looked at home games, the crowds would be recognizable by the color of the crowds.
Sure. Do they have, I don't suppose, do they have attendance records for the Negro Leagues?
I never researched that one. I think that they might have something. But as you said earlier, the problem with getting facts is there are some facts and there are some myths, and sometimes it's hard to figure out which is which.
Yep.
And I think the responsibility of history is on the present. So if MLB, in my opinion, were to have a month of this, you would be able to reflect on this in a greater, more attentive way, and we would celebrate that. And I'm a big fan of. The more you can teach about the history of things, the better we are as a society. And in a society that's clicking and social media and all that stuff going on, to be able to sit down into this and say, hey, this is what happened, and we're going to honor these players. And whether it's the Pittsburgh Pirates playing with their uniform for a game, or whether it's, we're going to have this kind of a day remembering these players, you get to wear whatever jerseys you want. I think it's a wonderful education tool. And
God, you have those stupid City Connect uniforms that look like they were designed by a high school graphic design artist, and you got you put a Grays Monarchs, you can put any of those uniforms on, and you're going to sell like crazy. You don't need to go City Connect with it. So, encoded within the webbing of the sleeve is the reference to the skyline of the. There's a bunch of nerds.
Well, the good news, the good news is we'll keep touting it. And for those that like these stories, again, click subscribe, if I can speak, and also comment. Let us know what your favorite stories are. I mean, we got a lot more. I really appreciate, Dad, you're a huge baseball fan. I know with APBA, they actually put out the cards of these players, and they have, you can actually play a game between, a 1980s team and a 1930s team, just based on the stats and the numbers. So it's a good time that you can look at. So it's great that you've dove into this history, because it shouldn't be lost, and it shouldn't be misremembered or remembered over here or remembered over there. It should be part of the baseball history and part of something that is embraced.
Yep, it is.
Yep.
And that is our episode of Rounding Third, from my father to you, from our kitchen table to yours, from our radio to your ears. Thank you for listening. I am your host, Brendan. That is my father, and that is my brother, Todd, and I can't thank you enough.
Bye, everyone.
Bye now.